few months ago, Sovol came out and released a few new 3D printers in their product line, the SV06 and the SV06 Plus. At first glance, these machines have a very similar design aesthetic to the Prism Mark III's or Mark IV, and came featured with a ton of features as claimed on their website. And at the time of launch, their pre-order pricing was pretty competitive with a large build volume, especially for the SV06 Plus. At $299 US, I pulled the trigger, I bought the machine. It came a few weeks later, and I've had the machine for about 2 months now. And in this video, we're going to talk about what I like about the machine, what could be improved, and if it's worth your time and money. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Hey everybody, Big Jano here. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Okay, so this is going to be my take on the Sovol SV06 Plus. I guess if you want to call it a review, you can, but I wanted to give you my holistic expectations and realities on this machine after 2 months of use, from what you get in the box, how everything gets installed, from getting everything set up and getting printing on the machine. I wanted to give you guys my whole take from start to finish and let you guys figure out if this machine is a good addition for you if you're looking for another large size 3D printer. This machine is also a first for me, as it's my first direct drive 3D printer, as my other two 3D printers are Bowden style setups, both the FL Sun Super Racer and my Anycubic Mega X. And before you all say everything in the comments, I just want to make one thing clear. No, my Anycubic Mega X is not gone for good. Yes, it is off the table behind there. It did take its place for the time being. However, it is in the other room right now. I'm actually working on getting some things repaired on it, and I actually intend to get it back up and running fairly soon. So yes, I still have my Anycubic Mega X. As always, I'm going to let you all know that I bought this machine with my own money. Keep in mind that Sovol did not reach out to me or give me this 3D printer free of charge. They did not ask me to make a review video. These are going to be all my own thoughts and opinions, so just keep that in mind. If you are looking to buy this machine, definitely consider the opinion of other videos or other people that have this machine. Definitely shop around and only find what works for you. So keep that in mind. With that being said, let's take a look at the Sovol SV06 Plus in more detail. To start, the Sovol SV06 Plus has a 300 by 300 by 340 millimeter build volume, and I found that to be a decent size. I feel like 300 by 300 is usually a good sweet spot. It's not super big. As you get with the larger printers, you do have to run them slower, and there's more weight to the machine itself. But this one seems pretty lightweight. They actually did, it's not super dense. The bottom is pretty hollowed out, unlike my Anycubic Mega X, where all the hardware and the electronics are hidden underneath in the base. Here, it's just mostly the aluminum frame, some wires that get tucked in the channels, and some of the motors and cables. The build quality of this machine consists of aluminum channels and injection molded plastic parts. I do like the mix between the two materials, as it keeps it nice and rigid with the aluminum, but also saves some weight with some of the injection molded plastic parts. Also, the plastic parts don't look cheap. For this type of build volume and this size, you do need stability, and this printer does have that with its dual Z-rod setup. It has two couplers keeping the rod in place at the base where the motor sits, and then on the top you actually see there are two bearings that situate on the top that are embedded in the injection molded plastics to help keep that stability, which I do love seeing that. However, I was kind of shocked to find that there was only one motor controlling both Z axes, which we'll get into that more in detail on some of the things later on. But with my Anycubic Mega X, there's actually a motor on each side of the Z axis controlling each of those sides, and helps it keep level and uniform that way. So a little bit of a questionable choice only having the one motor. Continuing the build with this machine, the electronics consist of a 32-bit main board embedded with Marlin firmware, and it does also come with an LCD capacitive touchscreen, which is very similar to my FL Sun Super Racer, and I had no problems with the touchscreen. The feel of it feels good, and it doesn't feel super flimsy either. Continuing the electronic side of things, you do also notice that the power supply and the control box are both rear mounted on the back side of the aluminum channels. I really do like this, having it open like that in case you need to get into the control box to replace or swap something. It's much easier to do so versus, in my case, the Anycubic Mega X, where all the electronics are housed underneath the base. so you do have to take off the underside panel, a bunch of screws later, and really get in there to fix something. So I do like it having open and accessible for that to happen. This machine also comes with belt tensioning knobs both in the X and the Y. I found these to be pretty easily to use, and I actually found the belts to be rather too tight when I took it out of the box and installed the machine, so definitely keep that in mind. I definitely had to loosen my belts just a touch, and just something to keep in mind before you start printing with this machine. Looking at the top end of this machine, you do get a filament runout sensor with the SV06 Plus, as well as a nice injection molded plastic spool holder. I found this to be really nice and sturdy, and there's actually bearings that are built inside of it, so it rolls nice and easy with any of your spools, whether it be a plastic or cardboard spools. You're not going to have a problem with that. The power supply with this machine is a 24 volt 500 watt power supply, so it does heat up everything fairly quickly. However, it is not a Meanwell power supply, so if you guys are Meanwell power supply enthusiasts, then you might not like this machine. But it's worked very well since I've had the machine. I've had no issues with it. It's actually the same brand of power supply that's on my FL Sun Super Racer. The bed does take a couple minutes to heat up, but given the larger build volume, that doesn't really come as a surprise to me much. Speaking of the bed, this bed has a 300 by 300 millimeter build volume, and it does come with a PEI powder coated spring steel flex plate, something you don't see very often on machines this large. The bed also has thermal insulation underneath, which I do appreciate. I also appreciate the attention to detail, adding the 2 set screws in the back to help align the build plate in its proper position. You don't know how many times I've had to realign and align the circular build plate on my FL Sun Super Racer because it's not dead center. So thank you, Sovol, for adding those. It makes my life so much easier. The bed coating is your typical PEI powder coated material, which works fairly well. It works as intended. I have no issues with it. I'm generally very picky on the build surface materials, whether it be that specialty coated glass like on my Anycubic Mega X, or on my FL Sun Super Racer, I have a Wham Bam PEX Smooth Shield Flex Plate, and that thing has been working like a dream lately. So I like having good adhesion build surfaces, and I can say this one has been no exception. It's done really well, and it's done the job, and I've really had no issues with it so far. Although the grid pattern on the bed surface really isn't useful in my opinion. If you like it, then you like it, but aesthetically, I wish they could just take that off. The hot end of this machine consists of a planetary gear extruder, which is really nice loading and unloading filament, and I found that the tension it puts on the filament when it extrudes is very nice, and I've had very good luck with the extruder so far with the few months I've had it. It also does include an all-metal heat break and a Volcano-sized hot end. I'd say it's a Volcano style, but Sovol actually went the route of doing a proprietary nozzle design for this machine. So if you did want to use a Volcano style nozzle like an E3D Volcano, you might have to adjust your fan height because it is a little bit different length. I really do like the design choice Sovol went with the planetary gear extruder. It makes pushing filament through much easier. It grips the filament well and evenly, and loading and unloading filament is really easy as well. With the little front wheel, you're able to spin the wheel counterclockwise and clockwise to load unload filament fairly easily. It saves me a lot of time not having to go through the touchscreen to physically click a button to load and unload. Just saves me that much more time that I could be printing things. One thing I forgot to mention is that Sovol allows you to print with this machine up to 300 degrees Celsius on the hot end and up to 100 degrees Celsius on the bed. This makes sense given the hot end is an all metal heat break, but if you want to print anything with carbon fiber or anything abrasive, I suggest not using the nozzle that comes stock with the machine. It is still a brass nozzle, so you are going to eat through that fairly quickly. I'm not sure why Sovol didn't include a hardened steel nozzle to use, especially when they claim you can print with higher temp materials as well as some abrasives like carbon fiber, nylon, stuff like that. So not sure why they didn't give us one, but I know that for a fact now that they do have some hardened steel nozzles on their website you can buy. So definitely go buy one before you play with anything high temp so you don't destroy your nozzle. While it would have been nice to have a hardened steel nozzle already assembled on the printer out of box or even as a spare, I kind of see why they went that route. They probably wanted this printer to be geared towards the intro user 3D printer enthusiasts, so that's my guess at least why they went that route. Regardless, if you do decide to print anything abrasive, make sure you put a hardened steel nozzle on there before you do so, or else you're going to damage your brass nozzle fairly quickly. The assembly of the machine was rather straightforward and actually one of the easier machines I've ever had to put together. The assembly of this machine was very straightforward and very easy to accomplish. We did this actually on a live stream. We put it together on one of my Twitch live streams, which did take a little bit longer just because we were interacting back and forth with the chat. However, if I wasn't streaming, this would normally probably take me between 30 to 45 minutes. I am a slow builder by trade, so I like to make sure I do everything correctly and take my time. This printer does come included with everything you're going to need to assemble the printer. It does come with all the right sized Allen wrenches. It comes with a few additional tools as well. You get a spare hot end. You do also get a sample spool of PLA, which I do appreciate that it's on a roll and not just some plastic in a bag. So thank you for that, Sovol. And you do also get some additional hardware. You also get this really cool declogging tool, which every 3D printer should come with one of those standard. I don't know why they don't. You also get another pair of snippers or shears, and you also do get a pair of fine tip tweezers as well. The Sovol SV06 Plus also comes with a really nice instruction document. It's really well laid out. There's tons of pictures. It actually shows you what components or parts that are needed at that step of the installation process, which I do find helpful, and they labeled all the hardware bags with numbers so you can follow along super easily. Most of this printer already comes pre-assembled, and you just have to attach certain components together. The bottom half of the machine, the base, and the top half gantry already came pre-assembled separately, and you just had to attach the gantry to the base, screw in a few screws, plug in a few cables for the motors and the runout sensor, attach the power supply in the control box, and plug it in and make sure it's set to the correct voltage. Once you do that, before you plug it in, make sure you set your voltage to your home country. Since I'm in the United States, I set it to 110 or 115 volts. If you're in a different country that requires the higher voltage to 240, set it to that. Otherwise, you could have some electrical issues. You could fry your printer or it won't turn on. So check your voltage before you plug it in. Once everything was installed, I just followed the instructions how to set up the leveling process for the machine and get the slicer set up as well to get myself printing. When it comes to leveling this machine, it is kind of daunting and confusing at first. Sovol has gone the route of doing multiple steps to get this thing up and running, calibrated, and leveled correctly. There is a Z-axis leveling mechanism where, if you're familiar with the Prism machines, it takes the X gantry, goes all the way up the Z-axis until it runs out of room, runs into the top of the gantry, auto corrects itself, and then comes back down. In terms of bed level, you do have a probe situated on the hot end, similar to the Prism machines, where it'll go to different spots on the bed. I think there's 24 or 25 different points, and it will go to each segment on the bed and calculate how level it is at that particular segment and calculate its offset. This printer also includes sensorless homing in the X and the Z gantries. We talked about the Z axis leveling already, but it does run the X gantry all the way over until it runs out of room, and then there is a sensor in the Y to keep the bed at its homing position. While Sovol recommends doing these in a particular order to set the printer up, I recommend getting your X gantry as level as possible, then doing your Z axis leveling, followed by your multi-point leveling on your bed, and then doing your Z offset on your nozzle. I found out very quickly in my experience that if you don't have your X gantry super level, you're going to have one side higher than the other, and you're going to have really bad adhesion on your first layer. Your one side's going to be too deep, your one side's going to be too high, and it's just not going to come out really well, and you're going to have some printing problems, or even have prints come off the bed like I had happen. And I'll explain that in a little bit once I show off some prints. I've unfortunately come to the conclusion that I do have to re-level this bed after every so many prints. That is one of the downsides of this machine so far. That after 3 or 4 prints, it seems like your multi-probe Z offsets in different spots lose their values. So you do have to do that every so often to get a new set of mesh values before you can do your Z offset again and start your prints again. The good news is that once you do your Z-axis calibration and get your X gantry as level as possible, the only things you really have to redo is your bed level mesh process and your Z offset. In terms of Z offset calibration, it does make it super simple. The interface allows you to adjust it by 1/10 of a thousandth or even by 1/1000th as well. And I just use the paper leveling method to get the nozzle at the right height. To get your X gantry as level as possible, I recommend having a pair of metal shims. Or in my case, since I didn't have metal shims, I used 2 equal sized soup cans. Thank you, Modbot, for that recommendation, showing that off in your old video. I do appreciate that. It worked wonders. And then taking those soup cans, putting them on each side of the X gantry. Then I took the couplers on the Z-axis rods and turned them so that the X gantry was at the correct height on both sides until they're nice and level and sitting on top of the soup cans. So they're nice and level, and I can know they're at the right height. Not the most scientific leveling process, but it did work in my scenario. Sovol does use a skin Cura software that they do include in the SD card with this machine. Because of my past track record with manufacturer-made slicer profiles, which has not been very good, I decided to just make my own Cura profile for this machine. I ended up importing a Prism Mark III's 0.2 draft profile from Prusa Slicer into Cura, adjusted the bed volume, size, and height, adjusted the retraction settings, and maybe adjusted the temperatures to my preference. Other than that, I've been using that stock profile and been using it for testing in the 2 months I've had the machine. So now we've gotten to the part of the video where you guys are really interested in the quality of the prints, how prints come out with this machine, the quality of how they look. And I'm here to say that the prints so far have been generally really good. Of course, the first print we printed on this was indeed a Benchy. This was printed in Polymaker's Polyterra Blue PLA. And honestly, the quality of this Benchy is really well done. You can see there isn't any issues with cooling. I didn't get any stringing with this profile whatsoever as well. You can actually read the text, and the bottom surface does look fairly nice as well. So first test wasn't too bad. From there, it was on to my next calibration print, and that indeed was my miniature Nozzle fridge magnet model. This was printed in Printed Solid Blood Red Glitter PLA, and overall the top side doesn't look too bad. The print quality is fairly good. This is where, however, I did run into that first layer adhesion issue. One of the sides on the bottom kind of lifted up a little bit. It doesn't look completely perfect on that first layer. However, the bottom side does look good with that finish. And overall, the model did print fairly well, but this is where we did have to go back and level that X gantry to be really level. You can also see that first layer on the back side. You can see a little bit more uniform on one side versus the other. Minus the leveling issue, this was still a pretty decent quality print. When I was at Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Festival a few weeks ago, I ended up getting a miniature bust made out of myself from a 3D scan from our good friend Zach, and that's when I really started to notice that levelness issue with the first layer. You can see that bottom surface, that first layer was a lot higher on the one side than the other, so you can see those layers started peeling a little bit. Outside of that, the quality of this was really good. I used some Sliceworks Silk Silver PLA for this little print, another little test print to test out the bust as well, but that's when I kind of noticed that I needed to adjust the level pretty quickly in order to get some better adhesion there. From there, I went ahead and started testing out Pet G to see how well it did with the machine. I ended up printing another miniature Nozzle in Pet G. This is some Green Gate Emerald Green Pet G, and I printed a bunch of these for the Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Festival to hand out. And overall, the print was really nice here. I basically took the same draft profile I used for PLA and just bumped the speeds down and increased the temperatures to match the PLA settings. And we did get a really good first layer, much better than the last nozzle we printed. At this point, I wanted to test out the high temperature capabilities of the all metal heat break, so I ended up getting some high temperature Pet G from Green Gate 3D at the Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Festival to test this out. This was Green Gate's high temp clear Pet G. This was printed at 250 to 255 degrees Celsius. This can actually get printed up to 290 degrees Celsius, and is the same exact Benchy you guys saw in my last posted video of the raw testing footage. This is that Benchy, and you guys can see in that video. If you haven't seen that video, the link will be up above. But the print quality on this was fairly good. A few little stringy bits, but more or less me needing to dry out the filament. Pet G does need dried out, and here in the South, it does get rather humid really quickly. But regardless, this was still a really good print on this machine. This printed at a lot higher temperature, and it ran it with no problems whatsoever. From there, I didn't do a lot of extra frivolous prints or test prints for that matter. However, I did end up using this printer a lot for a lot of upcoming projects, both for the Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Festival, which I attended back in April, and for this upcoming Midwest Rep Rap Festival in Goshen, Indiana in just a few weeks. The next thing printed on the Sovol was rather big, but this was my new triangular abstract lamp design. Printed the top half in some of that clear high temp Pet G. The base was printed in some Printed Solid Soul Black Glitter PLA. And this thing has some LEDs inside of it. You can control it with the WLED controller and ESP8266. And the print quality on this came out fantastic again. That bottom layer right there, you can see, just looks really beautiful. The print quality was fantastic. This took about 19 hours for the top lampshade to print. The bottom half took about 5 or 6 hours. But with that profile, I was still getting some really good prints out of this machine. The model's not finalized yet, but it will be posted to my printables page soon if you want to print one yourself. One of the things this machine took me by surprise is how easy color swap prints can actually be. I did a lot of prints on this machine for various projects that required a color swap halfway or somewhere through the print, and the printer actually has enabled firmware to let you do that very easily. As long as you set up the plugin in Cura before you slice your print, you should be able to do it as long as you know where to slice. To sum it up briefly, during a color swap, the printer will actually raise the Z gantry up to a specific height, it will purge the old filament out, and then it will keep the bed warm throughout the entire changing process. It will cool down the nozzle after a while if you don't do anything, or if it's an overnight print and you're not there to attend to it, but you will be able to heat it back up to its printing temperature. Then you're able to purge new filament in. It will continue purging out the old filament, and it'll give you the option after X amount of filament being purged if you would like to purge more filament, or if you would like to resume the print. Once you're happy with the color coming out of the nozzle, you can start the print back up, and it'll continue going until the next color print swap, or when the print is finished. Out of any of the three 3D printers I own at the moment, this 3D printer has the best color swapping capabilities of any machine I've used to date. The first thing I tried this out on was this custom Ohio State logo I designed for my game room. It has 5 color swaps in total, and after each one had no issues merging the next layer. You can see the color swaps in there. No issues with quality whatsoever. But honestly, this was all on one print job, and the bed kept warm the entire time each color swap was happening. I also made a similar multicolor sign of the Rocky Mountain Rep Rap Festival logo that I got to take with me when I went to Colorado a few weeks ago. While I don't currently have the sign with me now, I ended up giving it to my good friend Justin, one of the co-organizers of the event. It was a fantastic print, over 9 color swaps, 13 hours of total print time, and each layer printed just looked fantastic. Each color swap went on flawlessly with no issues, and the quality of the sign overall looks just as good as the Ohio State sign I just showed you. With another Rep Rap Festival coming up soon, I figured it was another good time to utilize the color swapping features on this machine even more by creating some custom QR codes for my various social media channels. These were generated off a website called QR Code to STL. Once you put in all your information, it will generate an STL file, and then you can slice it up in your slicer to get the color swap at the exact point you need it to. The base layer is some printed solid quarter white PLA, and the top layer is some printed solid Sol Black glitter PLA. I made one for each of my social media channels, so if you end up coming to the Midwest Rep Rap Festival or any other event in the future I end up attending, you'll be able to scan those QR codes and find each of my respective social media channels where you can follow, subscribe, whatever. Speaking of social media platforms, if you're still watching this video and if you found this information useful so far, definitely go hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, and follow along this journey that we called YouTube. I don't know, plug in the middle of the video. Back to the video. Regardless how you utilize it, the color swap features enabled in the firmware in this machine are just fantastic and super straightforward. One of the things I really love about this machine is that it has those advanced firmware capabilities, unlike older machines where many Marlin features were disabled, or you need to create your own firmware and do a lot of different compiling just to get that color swap enabled. This makes it so much easier with this firmware, and Sovol does a great job of letting us enable it so we can just have that expanded capabilities of this machine. So Sovol, well done on your end. I'm so excited about the color swapping capabilities of the SV06 Plus that I'll probably make another video in detail how to make those QR code prints step by step. If you guys want to see that, let me know in the comments below. I also might do a video on how to get that plugin enabled in Cura so you can do the color swap without any problems. All right, we've talked a lot about some really good features of this machine. Now let's talk about some of the not so good things. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I was struggling early on to get that good first layer adhesion with many of my prints, as that first layer level and the bed level were just not uniform at all. Even after much troubleshooting, it took me having to manually level my X gantry and make sure that each side was completely level before doing any Z offsetting or bed mesh leveling to get those first layers looking good. Like some people's issues on the SV06, I think the Z-axis leveling feature doesn't have enough force to really counter-correct how level the Z-axis gets when it gets all the way to the top of the gantry. So I think maybe pushing a little bit more force when it hits the top, I think would help counter-correct its levelness a little bit better. Regardless, I think the leveling process just becomes a little bit confusing, having multiple different steps to level the bed correctly, and then having to do your Z offset on top of that. I think for a novice user, that's a little bit too much to grasp. Sure, it's not super difficult, but it can get pretty frustrating, especially when you have to go and re-level your bed every few prints. It really takes away some of that value it creates being so low cost and having all the features it does if you can't consistently get a good first layer. Another negative I have, and some people might question me on this, but I'm not a big fan of how they did the wiring for the bed wires, as well as the wiring for the hot end assemblies. Let's start first and foremost with the bed wiring. Yes, I know in the pre-production units of the SV06 Plus, some early reviewers had issue with the fact that there was lack of strain relief in those wires. While Sovol has corrected the issue for the most part, I did receive a printer with that strain relief added to the bed wires. I found that that wire harness was rubbing up against the backside of the base quite often in the first few prints I had. So I ended up having to print a little model I found on Thingiverse that clips into the side of the aluminum frame and actually raises that wiring up a little bit so it doesn't constantly rub back and forth on the backside of the base. You can see here these wires are kind of kinked right near the connection where the hot end sits. Right now it's not too bad, like everything moves pretty well, there's enough strain relief on it. However, I'm gonna have to keep my eye on those wires so there's no frays or damages down the road, and if there are, I need to replace them ASAP. A couple other things I want to address in the negative pile. These are more kind of minor complaints in my opinion. First thing is loading and unloading filament in the extruder can get tricky at first. When I first started loading and unloading filament in, I would take that little tensioner lever, pull it back, and then try to load filament in, then let go, and then try to use the little knob to turn it in, and it wasn't gripping onto it. But I found that actually not touching that tensioner lever and just sticking it into the slot where you put filament in and then turning the wheel, it actually grips better because now the gear wheels are all in the right place. So I guess something that was just more user error on my end. My other little critique comes in the user interface. Anytime you go to the leveling section on the screen, it automatically does a homing feature where it homes its X, Y, and Z position. I'm not sure why it needs to do that every single time you go to the leveling tab. Regardless if you're going to do any leveling or not, it'll do an auto home automatically after you press the button, and I just find that to be kind of unnecessary, especially when it does the exact same thing right before you're about to do any of the 3 leveling techniques we talked about earlier. Another comment I'll make on this machine, and this is more of a personal preference, but it's not the quietest machine out in the market. It's certainly not the loudest, but you can still hear a lot of noise and vibration coming from the X and Y axes when there's movement. Yes, this printer has 2209 stepper drivers, so you would kind of think it would be a little bit quieter, but that being said, it is rather quiet as long as you're not directly next to the machine. If you're in the other room, it's really hard to hear it. The power supply fans and the part cooling fans are also pretty noticeably loud, but those are pretty typical. I don't expect those to be quiet. Okay, conclusion time. With all that's been said, good and bad, let's take a look at our final thoughts on this machine. I really do believe you are going to get great value out of this machine if you set your expectations correctly. If you are expecting a direct clone of a Prusa Mark III's or Mark IV based off its design aesthetic, unfortunately you're going to be severely disappointed. However, if you are looking for a 3D printer that has many similar features as a Prusa Mark III's or Mark IV, with the understanding that you are willing to accept why the price point for this machine is much lower, then I think your value with this machine is going to be a lot greater, considering that you can still get very good quality prints out of this machine with the right amount of tinkering and dialing it in. And yes, I do know that there's no perfect 3D printer out there. Heck, if there were, there would be no continuous improvement and innovation in this industry. It would all cease to exist. However, you do need to understand and wrap your head around the fact that there are certain components that make this machine a budget 3D printer, no matter which way you look at it. But even classifying it as a budget 3D printer, considering all the features you get with this machine at its price point, it is still such a great value, considering that there are many 3D printers out there that have half this feature set and are charging almost double the price. And given the feature set that this has, you can get some great quality prints out of this machine. 99% of the prints I've gotten so far to date on this machine have been pretty decent quality. I've been able to work on a ton of projects and use this machine to continue my project base and hopefully showcase more things to you guys all in person at festivals and here on the YouTube channel. Yes, I do think this is a great value 3D printer if you know what you're looking for and can set your expectations correctly on what you're going to get out of this machine. I am going to continue to use this machine on a day-to-day basis and continue testing it to see if I keep getting consistent, great quality and good results out of this machine months down the road versus me just being in the honeymoon period, only having this machine for a few months. Some things I haven't been able to do yet at the time of filming this video. I haven't been able to print anything with TPU yet on this machine, so we still need to try that out. I also haven't been able to print any abrasive materials on this machine yet. I haven't had a chance to do so. so we'll definitely be taking a look at that soon. With that being said, we're going to wrap up the video here on my take on the Sovol SV06 Plus. Thank you everybody for watching this video. I greatly appreciate all your support, especially if you made it all the way to the end. If you have any additional questions about this 3D printer or want to talk about a topic in more detail, definitely leave me a comment down below and I'll happily take it into consideration. If you all enjoyed the video today or found it informational or helpful, hit that like button for me please. It would be greatly appreciated. It does help out the channel, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Also, while you're at it, hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when new YouTube content drops here. And don't forget, if you want to follow me along on my other social media platforms, there will be links to those also in the description. With all that being said, that's going to wrap up today's video. Thank you so much all for watching. I greatly appreciate every single one of you. I'll catch you all in the next video, and until next time, as always, keep doing it big.